Wrong floor. Marcus Chun barely glanced up from his phone as the elevator doors opened on the 10th floor of the Sterling Financial Tower. The woman pushing the industrial cleaning cart wasn't supposed to be here during executive hours. She looked out of place among the marble floors and mahogany paneling, her navy blue uniform a stark contrast to the tailored suits that typically populated this level. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't apologize or explain herself, just maneuvered the cart through the reception area with practiced efficiency, her movements deliberate and economical. Everything about her suggested someone who understood the value of not drawing attention. Medium height, athletic build concealed beneath loose-fitting work clothes, graying brown hair pulled back in a functional ponytail that had seen better days. Her name tag read Carmen Santos, printed in block letters on a plastic badge that had been laminated so many times the edges were starting to curl. The cart she pushed was standard issue for Pinnacle Cleaning Services industrial gray, with squeaky wheels that announced her presence long before she entered any room. Marcus finally looked up from his trading app when the squeaking became impossible to ignore. His corner office commanded a view of downtown Seattle's financial district, floor-to-ceiling windows that made him feel like he was floating above the city. At 32, he'd made senior analyst through a combination of family connections and ruthless ambition, and his tolerance for disruption during market hours was non-existent. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice carrying the particular edge that came from someone who'd never had to clean up after himself. "Building services are supposed to be finished by 7 a.m. It's almost 10. Carmen paused in her methodical arrangement of cleaning supplies, turning to face him with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. Her eyes were dark brown, alert in a way that seemed at odds with her humble position. "Emergency spill on 12, running behind schedule." "Well, can you run behind schedule somewhere else?" Marcus gestured broadly at his multiple monitors, each displaying streaming financial data that justified his $200,000 salary. "Some of us have actual work to do." She nodded once, neither apologetic nor defensive, and began moving toward the executive conference room. The wheels of her cart created a rhythmic squeak, squeak, squeak that seemed to echo through the marble corridor, a sound that belonged in a hospital or school, not in the rarefied air of Seattle's premier investment firm. From the adjacent office, Jennifer Walsh emerged with the swift stride of someone who'd built her reputation on handling problems before they became crises. At 45, she was the youngest woman ever to make partner at Sterling Financial, achievement she'd earned through 16-hour days and a ruthless attention to detail that had made her both feared and respected throughout the building. Her tailored Armani suit probably cost more than Carmen made in 3 months, and her expression suggested she'd noticed the discord in her perfectly orchestrated environment. "What's happening out here?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate answers. Marcus straightened in his chair, eager to demonstrate his vigilance. "Cleaning ladies disrupting the executive floor during trading hours. I thought we had protocols about this." Jennifer's gaze swept over Carmen, taking in the worn edges of her uniform, the practical sneakers that had seen countless miles of corridor walking, the way she continued organizing her supplies without acknowledging the conversation happening around her. "The service contract specifies completion by 7:30 a.m., she said, consulting her phone's calendar app. "It's now 9:47. "Emergency cleanup," Carmen repeated, her tone remaining neutral. 16 floors. "Takes time." From the break room, 2 junior associates had emerged, drawn by the unusual activity on a floor that typically maintained library quiet professionalism. Brad Morrison was 26, fresh from Wharton, with the kind of confidence that came from never having experienced real consequences for his actions. His friend Jake Sullivan had started at Sterling 6 months earlier, and was still learning that success in the financial world often depended more on perception than performance. Is she supposed to be here? Brad asked, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. His voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who'd grown up viewing service workers as background characters in his own story. Jake smirked, emboldened by his colleague's audacity. Maybe she's lost. These older cleaning ladies sometimes get confused about which floors they're supposed to be on. Carmen's hands never stopped moving as she arranged spray bottles and microfiber cloths with military precision. Each item had its designated place on the cart, a system of organization that spoke to efficiency born from necessity rather than preference. She'd heard variations of this conversation in dozens of buildings over the past 5 years, and her response was always the same: complete the job, ignore the commentary, move on to the next task. The thing is, Jennifer continued, her voice taking on the lecturing tone she used during client presentations, executive floors have specific cleaning windows for a reason. Market opens at 6:30 West Coast time. By 9 a.m., we need absolute focus and minimal distractions. She gestured toward the conference room where Carmen was heading, a space that hosted million-dollar deals and strategy sessions that could move entire markets. That room is booked for a client presentation at 10:30. Wellington Capital is flying in from New York specifically for this meeting. Carmen nodded again, the same economical acknowledgement she'd given Marcus. Understood. 15 minutes. The response seemed to irritate Jennifer more than open defiance would have. 15 minutes for what? You haven't even started yet, and that room requires detailed cleaning. The table, the chairs, the presentation screens, the carpet. Wellington Capital doesn't accept anything less than perfection. From his desk, Marcus felt compelled to add his own expertise. Last week, they complained about fingerprints on the conference table. Fingerprints. Do you understand how detailed this needs to be? Brad had drifted closer, his curiosity overriding his usual focus on quarterly earnings reports. What kind of emergency spill takes 3 hours to clean up anyway? How hard is it to mop a floor? Carmen's movements never faltered as she began unpacking her supplies. Industrial-grade glass cleaner, furniture polish, disinfectant wipes, vacuum attachments designed for different surfaces. Each item was placed with the same methodical precision, as if she was preparing for a task that required exact timing and flawless execution. You know what the problem is? Jake said, warming to his theme. No accountability. These cleaning companies hire anyone who shows up. No background checks, no training, no standards. Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from Wellington Capital confirming their arrival time, and her patience officially expired. I'm calling Pinnacle Cleaning Services. This is exactly the kind of service disruption that costs us clients. She stepped away to make the call, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the staccato rhythm of someone who decided to take control of a situation. From the elevators, 2 more employees had emerged, drawn by the unusual commotion on the floor that typically maintained corporate tranquility. David Kim worked in risk assessment, a soft-spoken analyst who prided himself on identifying problems before they became catastrophes. At 38, he'd developed the cautious worldview that came from spending his days calculating the probability of disaster. Sarah Martinez was newer to the firm, a recent MBA graduate who'd been hired specifically for her expertise in international markets. What's going on? David asked, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that office politics could be more dangerous than market volatility. Brad was eager to explain, his voice taking on the conspiratorial tone that office gossip demanded. The cleaning lady showed up 3 hours late, acting like she owns the place. Jennifer's about to get her fired. Sarah watched Carmen work, noticing details that escaped her colleagues' attention. The way she moved with economy and purpose, never wasting motion or energy. The quiet confidence that suggested someone who'd learned to operate in hostile environments without losing focus. The almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings, as if she was cataloging every person, every conversation, every potential threat without appearing to pay attention to any of it. She doesn't seem disruptive, Sarah observed quietly. Just doing her job. Jake laughed, the sound carrying more derision than humor. Her job is to be invisible. Clean the offices, empty the trash, disappear before anyone important shows up. Instead, she's here during prime hours, disrupting client meetings. Carmen had moved to the conference room windows, beginning the process of cleaning 16-foot floor-to-ceiling glass that provided a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. Her technique was flawless, long, even strokes that left no streaks, no mist. Spots, no evidence that human hands had ever touched the surface. Marcus called out from his office, his voice carrying the impatience of someone who'd been interrupted during what he considered critical work. How long is this going to take? I have a conference call with Tokyo in 20 minutes. Tokyo's closed, Carmen said quietly, not turning from the window. Markets don't open for 6 hours. The correction hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. She was right, of course. But the fact that a cleaning lady was correcting him about international trading schedules felt like a personal insult. Maybe she knows something we don't, Brad said with mock seriousness. Maybe she's got insider information about the Nikkei. The laughter that followed had an edge to it, the kind of cruel humor that people use to establish hierarchy at someone else's expense. Carmen continued cleaning, her movements steady and precise, showing no reaction to the commentary flowing. Around her, Jennifer returned from her phone call, her expression suggesting that the conversation hadn't gone as planned. Pinnacle says they don't have any record of emergency cleaning requests for this building. According to their dispatch logs, routine maintenance was completed at 6:15 a.m. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She looked directly at Carmen, her voice taking on the prosecutorial tone she used when questioning witnesses during depositions. So what exactly are you doing here? Carmen set down her cleaning cloth and turned to face the growing crowd of executives and analysts who had gathered to witness what was becoming an impromptu tribunal. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her posture suggested a subtle shift, like a coiled spring that had been compressed just a fraction. More, covering for Maria Gonzalez, she said simply. She called in sick. I'm finishing her route. Maria Gonzalez doesn't work weekdays, Jennifer replied, consulting her phone. She's weekend staff only. I know because I specifically requested weekend-only cleaning for the executive floors. The contradiction seemed to energize the crowd. David stepped forward, his risk assessment instincts finally engaging. If you're not scheduled to be here, and there's no emergency cleanup, then what are you really doing? Carmen's hands remained at her sides, but her eyes had begun moving in a pattern that most people wouldn't notice. She was cataloging exits, counting potential threats, measuring distances and angles with the automatic precision of someone who'd been trained to assess tactical situations without conscious thought. Doing my job, she said. Your job is to clean buildings, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. Not to stand around making excuses and disrupting business operations. My job, Carmen replied, her voice carrying a hint of something that made David's risk assessment alarms start chiming quietly in his subconscious, is to keep people safe. The response was so unexpected that it created a momentary silence. Jake was the first to recover, his laughter carrying genuine amusement. Safe from what? Dust bunnies? Dirty windows? From threats they don't see coming, Carmen said. Brad grinned, sensing an opportunity for entertainment. Oh, this is rich. The cleaning lady thinks she's security. What's next? Are you going to tell us you're an undercover cop? Carmen's expression didn't change. But something in her stillness suggested that Brad's joke had touched closer to truth than he realized. She turned back to the window, resuming her cleaning with the same methodical precision, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. Jennifer checked her watch, noting that Wellington Capital would be arriving in 45 minutes for a meeting that could determine Sterling Financial's expansion into European markets. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I need this room spotless in the next half hour. Can you do that, or do I need to call building security?" Carmen nodded once, the same economical acknowledgement she'd been giving all morning. 30 minutes. She moved to the conference table, beginning the process of cleaning and polishing the mahogany surface that had hosted negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her technique was flawless, each movement precise and efficient, as if she was following a protocol that had been drilled into her through countless repetitions. Sarah watched from the doorway, noting details that her colleagues were missing. The way Carmen's eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning her environment. The slight asymmetry in her posture, as if she was unconsciously favoring her left side. The small scar visible on her right hand, a thin white line that looked like it might have come from a knife blade. "She's not just a cleaning lady," Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. David heard her, his analytical mind beginning to process information that didn't fit the obvious narrative. "What do you mean? Look at how she moves. That's not the posture of someone who spent years pushing a mop. That's military bearing." Jake overheard and laughed again. "Military? Right. Maybe she was in the Salvation Army." But David was watching now, his trained eye beginning to notice patterns that suggested Sarah might be onto something. Carmen's movements were too controlled, too economical. She never wasted motion, never had to think about where she was placing her hands or feet. Every action flowed seamlessly into the next, like someone who'd been trained to operate under conditions where efficiency could mean the difference between life and death. Marcus called out from his office, his impatience finally boiling over. "I don't care if she's a former Navy SEAL. I care that she's disrupting my workflow during peak market hours. Get her out of here." Carmen paused in her cleaning, her hand still holding the microfiber cloth, her eyes focusing on Marcus with an intensity that made him suddenly uncomfortable. For just a moment, the mask of a humble service worker slipped, revealing something underneath that made David's risk assessment protocols go into high alert. "Navy SEALs," Carmen said quietly, "don't exist anymore. They were reorganized into Deviguru in 1987. The correction was delivered with the casual precision of someone correcting a minor factual error, but the knowledge it demonstrated was far beyond what anyone would expect from a building custodian. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses, heavier, more uncertain. Jennifer looked at her watch again, noting that they were now less than 30 minutes away from the Wellington Capital meeting. "I don't care what you know about military history. I care that you clean this room properly and get out before our clients arrive." Carmen returned to her work, but the dynamic had shifted. The executives were no longer just annoyed by a service disruption. They were beginning to realize that they might be dealing with someone who didn't fit the categories they'd assumed. The conference room was taking shape under Carmen's methodical attention. The windows were spotless, the table gleamed, and the chairs were arranged with geometric precision. But her audience was no longer just watching her work. They were watching her, trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become more complex than they'd anticipated. As she moved toward the final phase of the cleaning process, Carmen's eyes swept the room once more, cataloging details that most people would never notice. The sightlines from the windows, the acoustic properties of the space, the structural integrity of the furniture. She was operating on multiple levels, simultaneously completing the assigned task, while maintaining situational awareness that went far beyond what her job description required. The executive floor had fallen into an unusual quiet. broken only by the soft sounds of professional cleaning and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. But underneath the surface, normalcy, something had changed. The comfortable assumption that people could be easily categorized and dismissed had been challenged by a woman who appeared to be far more than the sum of her uniform and cleaning cart. In 28 minutes, Wellington Capital would arrive for their meeting. And in 28 minutes, the executives at Sterling Financial would discover that their assumptions about Carmen Santos were about to become much more complicated. The Wellington Capital presentation materials arrived by courier at exactly 10:15, delivered by a nervous-looking intern who clearly understood the significance of the documents he carried. Jennifer Walsh signed for the package personally, her pen moving across the receipt with the careful precision of someone who knew that million-dollar deals could be derailed by the smallest oversight. The presentation binders were leather-bound, each one containing market analysis that had taken Wellington's research team 6 months to compile. European expansion strategies, regulatory compliance frameworks, risk assessment matrices that would determine whether Sterling Financial could successfully compete in London's brutal financial markets. Carmen had finished cleaning the conference room's main surfaces and moved on to the more detailed work that most people never noticed. She was adjusting the ergonomic settings on each chair, ensuring that the seat heights were uniform and the armrests aligned. Her movements were methodical, but there was something almost ritualistic about the way she approached each task, as if precise execution was more than just professional pride. From the reception area, Kevin Brennan watched with growing irritation. As Sterling's director of operations, he was responsible for ensuring that client meetings proceeded without disruption. At 52, he'd spent 3 decades in corporate environments, working his way up from junior accountant to senior management. Through careful attention to detail and an obsessive focus on protocol. His gray suit was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to mirror brightness, and his thinning hair styled with mathematical precision. Everything about him suggested someone who believed that success came from controlling variables and eliminating unpredictability. Carmen Santos represented exactly the kind of chaos he built his career around preventing. "This is unacceptable," he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having his concerns taken seriously. Wellington Capital is expecting seamless professionalism. Instead, they're going to walk into a cleaning operation. Marcus looked up from his trading screens, grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate his own vigilance. "I tried to explain that to her. She acts like she's entitled to be here during business hours." "Entitled," Kevin repeated, the word carrying a particular venom. "That's exactly the problem with these service companies. No respect for corporate priorities." Carmen continued her work, but Sarah Martinez noticed that her movements had become slightly more deliberate, as if she was listening to every word while maintaining the appearance of focused concentration. There was something unsettling about the way she could multitask without showing any visible signs of divided attention. The elevator chimed, announcing the arrival of Sterling's senior partners. Robert Sterling III emerged first, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone within sight. At 68, he was the founding partner's grandson and the architect of Sterling Financial's expansion from regional firm to national powerhouse. His charcoal wool suit was hand-tailored, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was styled in the classic executive cut that suggested both wisdom and vitality. When he spoke, people listened, not just because of his position, but because his words carried the weight of 4 decades in high-stakes finance. Behind him, Patricia Hawthorne followed with the measured stride of someone who'd learned to project confidence in rooms where she was often the only woman. As Sterling's managing partner, she'd negotiated deals that had shaped the Pacific Northwest's economic landscape. Her reputation for thorough preparation was legendary, and her tolerance for operational failures was non-existent. "Good morning, everyone," Robert said, his voice carrying easily across the marble floor. "I trust everything is ready for Wellington Capital?" Jennifer stepped forward immediately, her expression carefully neutral. "We're making final preparations now. Mr. Sterling, the presentation materials arrived on schedule, and the conference room is being detailed for the meeting." Robert's gaze swept across the area, taking in the unusual activity on a floor that typically maintained pristine quiet during business hours. His eyes settled on Carmen, who was now polishing the conference room's presentation screens with the same methodical attention she'd brought to every other task. "Building services during client hours?" he asked, his tone carefully modulated to avoid direct criticism while making his concern clear. Kevin stepped forward, eager to demonstrate his crisis management skills. "Operational oversight, sir. I'm addressing it immediately." Patricia consulted. Her platinum watch, a gift from grateful clients who'd profited from her strategic guidance. "Wellington arrives in 12 minutes. That room needs to be perfect." "It will be," Carmen said quietly. Not turning from the screen she was cleaning, the simple statement carried an assurance that seemed to surprise everyone who heard it. Not a promise or an apology, just a matter-of-fact declaration that suggested absolute confidence in her ability to deliver what was required. Brad Morrison had been eavesdropping from his cubicle, and now he approached with the swagger of someone who sensed an opportunity to impress senior management. "Mr. Sterling, I don't think she understands the importance of this meeting. Maybe someone should explain corporate priorities to her." Robert studied Brad with the same analytical attention he brought to market research, clearly categorizing him as an ambitious junior who hadn't yet learned the difference between helpful initiative and unnecessary drama. "I think she understands perfectly well, Mr. Morrison." The rebuke was gentle but unmistakable, and Brad retreated to his desk with the awareness that he'd miscalculated badly. Sarah watched the exchange with interest, noting that Robert Sterling seemed less concerned about Carmen's presence than his subordinates were. Carmen moved to the final phase of her conference room preparation, adjusting the lighting to optimize visibility for the presentation screens while minimizing glare from the windows. Her fingers found the controls without looking, suggesting familiarity with building systems that went beyond routine cleaning duties. "Interesting," Patricia murmured, watching Carmen work. "Most cleaning staff don't understand presentation lighting." Jennifer felt compelled to explain, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was explaining. "She seems to have some technical knowledge, more than you'd expect." "More than you'd expect from what?" Patricia asked, her tone carrying the sharpness that had made her legendary in courtroom cross-examinations. The question hung in the air, challenging assumptions that no one had bothered to examine. Jennifer realized she didn't have a good answer. That wouldn't sound prejudiced, so she said nothing. From his position near the elevator, David Kim watched the interaction with growing fascination. His risk assessment training had taught him to pay attention when normal patterns were disrupted, and everything about Carmen Santos represented a deviation from expected norms. She moved through the building like someone who understood architecture at a structural level, not just surface cleaning. Her awareness of lighting systems, acoustic properties, and sightlines suggested training that went far beyond janitorial work. Most importantly, she demonstrated a kind of situational awareness that David had only seen in security professionals and military personnel. "Has anyone actually looked at her employment record?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to his colleagues. Jake Sullivan overheard and laughed. "What's to look at? She cleans buildings. That's not exactly rocket science." "Maybe not," David replied, "but she knows things that cleaning staff typically don't know." Carmen had moved to the conference room's VACA controls, making subtle adjustments that would ensure optimal air circulation for a room full of people wearing heavy business suits. Again, her fingers found the controls without hesitation, as if she'd performed this exact task countless times before. Kevin Brennan's irritation was reaching critical mass. As operations director, he was responsible for ensuring that every detail of the Wellington meeting proceeded flawlessly. Having an unscheduled cleaning operation running concurrent with client arrival was exactly the kind of variable that kept him awake at night. "I'm calling building security," he announced, pulling out his phone with decisive authority. "This has gone on long enough." Robert Sterling raised one hand in a gesture that stopped Kevin mid-dial. "Let's see how this plays out first." The suggestion surprised everyone, including Patricia, who'd worked with Robert long enough to recognize when he was following an instinct that others couldn't see. "Robert, Wellington Capital is expecting perfection. Any deviation from protocol could cost us this contract." "I understand the stakes," Robert replied calmly. "But I'm curious about something." Carmen had finished her conference room preparations and was now organizing her cleaning cart with the same methodical precision she'd brought to everything else. Every bottle, cloth, and tool had its designated place, arranged according to some internal system that prioritized efficiency and immediate access. Sarah Martinez approached the conference room entrance, ostensibly to review the setup, but actually to observe Carmen more closely. The room was immaculate, clean to a standard that exceeded anything Sarah had seen in her 2 years at Sterling Financial. The mahogany table gleamed like liquid amber. The leather chairs were arranged with geometric precision, and the presentation screens had been calibrated to optimal brightness. Even the air seemed cleaner, somehow more breathable than the rest of the building. "This is incredible," Sarah said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "I've never seen this room look better." Carmen nodded once, the same economical acknowledgement she'd been giving all morning, and began pushing her cart toward the elevator. But Jennifer wasn't ready to let her leave without addressing the operational irregularities that had defined the past hour. "Wait," Jennifer called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built her career on getting answers to difficult questions. "I need to understand what happened here. Pinnacle Cleaning Services has no record of you being assigned to this building. Maria Gonzalez doesn't work weekdays. There was no emergency spill reported anywhere in the building." Carmen stopped but didn't turn around. "Sometimes the records are incomplete." "Incomplete how?" Patricia asked, her legal training compelling her to pursue inconsistencies until they resolved into coherent facts. "People make assumptions," Carmen replied, "about what needs to be documented." The response was cryptic enough to be frustrating, but delivered with enough quiet confidence to suggest that Carmen knew exactly what she was talking about. Marcus Chen emerged from his office, clearly annoyed that the disruption was continuing, even though the cleaning was complete. "Look, lady, whatever game you're playing, it ends now. You've cleaned the room, you've caused enough drama for one morning, and now it's time for you to disappear so the grown-ups can handle actual business." Carmen turned to face Marcus with movements that seemed almost choreographed, precise, and controlled in a way that made David's risk assessment alarms start chiming quietly in his subconscious. Her expression remained neutral, but something in her posture suggested that Marcus had just made a significant tactical error. "Grown-ups," she repeated, her voice remaining calm but carrying an undertone that made several people unconsciously step back. "That's right," Marcus continued, oblivious to the subtle shift in atmosphere. "This is where real decisions get made. $1 million deals, international finance, things that actually matter." Carmen's eyes swept across the assembled executives, cataloging each person with the automatic precision of someone who'd been trained to assess potential threats in hostile environments. Her gaze lingered on Robert Sterling, who was watching the exchange with interest rather than irritation. $1 million deals, she said quietly. International finance, things that matter. There was something in her tone that suggested she found Marcus's definition of importance somewhat limited, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she resumed pushing her cart toward the elevator, leaving behind a conference room that had been transformed into a space worthy of the most demanding clients. The elevator doors opened with mechanical precision, revealing the mirrored interior that reflected Carmen's unremarkable appearance back at the assembled executives. For just a moment, she paused at the threshold, looking back at the group of people who'd spent the morning treating her as an inconvenience to be managed. "Wellington Capital," she said quietly. "They're early." Before anyone could ask how she knew that, the building's main elevator chimed, announcing an arrival on the executive floor. Through the reception area's glass doors, 3 figures in expensive suits became visible, approaching with the confident stride of people who were accustomed to being received with immediate deference. Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from Building Security. "Wellington Capital Party arriving executive floor now. 3 minutes ahead of schedule." Carmen stepped into the service elevator as the Wellington delegation emerged from the main elevator, and the doors closed with quiet finality. The timing was so perfect that it seemed choreographed, as if she'd somehow known exactly when to make her exit to avoid any awkward encounters. Robert Sterling watched the closed elevator doors with thoughtful attention, then turned to greet Wellington Capital with the polished professionalism that had built Sterling Financial's reputation. But part of his mind remained focused on the woman who just disappeared, wondering what exactly he'd witnessed during the past hour. The conference room stood ready, clean to perfection, and prepared with a level of attention to detail that exceeded even Sterling's exacting standards. Everything was precisely as it should be, but the process by which it had been achieved remained mysteriously unexplained. Patricia approached the conference room entrance, noting details that hadn't been visible during Carmen's work. The acoustic dampening panels had been adjusted to optimize sound quality. The temperature controls had been calibrated for maximum comfort. Even the positioning of water glasses and notepads showed signs of professional attention that went far beyond routine. Cleaning. She knew what she was doing, Patricia murmured to Robert as they prepared to welcome their clients. "More than that," Robert replied quietly. "She knew things she had no business knowing." The Wellington Capital delegation was approaching, led by Victoria Hamilton, whose reputation for thorough due diligence had made her one of London's most feared negotiators. Behind her, 2 senior analysts carried briefcases that contained the financial instruments that could reshape Sterling's entire business model. Everything was ready for what would either be the most important meeting in Sterling Financial's history or its most expensive failure. The conference room was perfect. The presentation materials were organized, and the senior staff was prepared to deliver their most compelling arguments for European expansion. But in the back of everyone's mind remained the mystery of Carmen. Santos, the janitor who'd appeared from nowhere, demonstrated impossible competence and vanished with timing that seemed almost supernatural. The questions surrounding her identity would have to wait until after Wellington Capital departed. But those questions were growing more persistent with each passing moment. The morning's assumptions about service, workers, and corporate hierarchies had been quietly challenged by someone who refused to fit into comfortable categories. And the executive floor of Sterling Financial would never quite feel the same again. That the Wellington Capital meeting had exceeded every expectation. Victoria Hamilton's team spent 3 hours dissecting Sterling Financial's European expansion proposal. With surgical precision, challenging assumptions, probing financial models, and stress-testing contingency plans. By the time they departed, Sterling had secured preliminary approval for a partnership that could generate 8-figure revenues within 18 months. Robert Sterling was reviewing the signed letters of intent when Helen Rodriguez arrived for her afternoon shift. As building security supervisor, Helen was responsible for monitoring contractor access, investigating irregularities, and maintaining the detailed logs that kept Sterling Financial compliant with federal security requirements. At 43, Helen had spent 15 years in private security after serving 8 years as a military police officer. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and her navy blue uniform bore the kind of creases that suggested military discipline hadn't entirely left her system. She carried herself with the alert posture of someone who'd learned that complacency could be fatal. Helen's afternoon routine included reviewing the morning's security logs, checking contractor credentials, and investigating any anomalies that might indicate security breaches or procedural violations. Today's review flagged an irregularity that immediately commanded her attention. Pinnacle Cleaning Services showed completion of routine maintenance at 6:47 a.m., with all personnel off-site by 7:15 a.m., but the executive floor's keycard access logs showed sustained activity in the service areas between 9:30 and 10:45 a.m., while outside normal cleaning windows. Moreover, the biometric scanners had recorded unidentified handprints on several surfaces that weren't consistent with Sterling's employee database. Someone had been working on the executive floor during business hours, using equipment and accessing areas that required security clearance. Helen pulled up the building's surveillance footage, focusing on the 15th floor during the time period when the anomalies occurred. The cameras showed Carmen Santos working with professional efficiency, but Helen's trained eye noticed details that civilian observers had missed. Carmen moved through the building like someone conducting reconnaissance rather than routine cleaning. Her eyes constantly swept her environment, cataloging exits, security cameras, and potential concealment points. She handled building systems with familiarity that suggested extensive prior exposure to similar facilities. Most telling, her posture and movement patterns were inconsistent with civilian employment history. Helen had spent enough time around military personnel to recognize a bearing that couldn't be faked or forgotten. Carmen Santos carried herself like someone who'd been trained to operate in hostile environments. Helen picked up her phone and dialed Jennifer Walsh's extension. "Ms. Walsh, this is Helen Rodriguez from Building Security. I need to discuss the cleaning contractor who was on your floor this morning." Jennifer's voice carried immediate concern. "Is there a problem?" The Wellington meeting went perfectly, and the conference room was immaculate. "That's part of what I need to discuss. Can you come down to the security office? I'd like to show you something." 20 minutes later, Jennifer arrived accompanied by David Kim, whose curiosity about Carmen had been growing throughout the afternoon. Helen's security office was located in the building's basement, a windowless space filled with monitoring equipment and filing cabinets that contained detailed records of every person who'd accessed Sterling Financial's premises. "I've been reviewing this morning's security logs," Helen began, pulling up surveillance footage on her main monitor. "Several irregularities need investigation." The footage showed Carmen arriving at 9:23 a.m., 3 hours after Pinnacle Cleaning Services had officially completed their work. But more concerning was the way she moved through the building, demonstrating knowledge of systems and protocols that weren't included in standard cleaning contracts. "Watch this," Helen said, advancing the footage to show Carmen adjusting the conference room's via controls. Those systems require security codes that Building Services doesn't have access to. She manipulated climate controls like someone who'd been specifically trained on our equipment. David leaned forward, his analytical mind processing implications that made him increasingly uncomfortable. How would a cleaning contractor know those codes? "She wouldn't," Helen replied grimly, "unless she'd had previous access to restricted information." Jennifer felt a chill as she recalled the morning's events. Carmen's technical competence hadn't seemed suspicious at the time, just unexpectedly professional. But viewed through Helen's security expertise, the same action suggested something far more concerning. "There's more," Helen continued, advancing the footage to show Carmen's interaction with the biometric scanner. She attempted to access restricted systems using credentials that aren't in our database. The system logged her attempt but couldn't match her prints to any authorized personnel. On screen, Carmen's hand placement on the scanner was visible, but the attempt appeared to fail. She moved away without apparent concern, as if the rejection was expected rather than surprising. Could she have been testing our security? David asked, his risk assessment training making him consider worst-case scenarios. Possibly, Helen replied. Or she was looking for something specific in our systems. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Brad Morrison was holding court in the break room, regaling a growing audience with increasingly embellished accounts of the morning's confrontation. His natural tendency toward exaggeration had transformed Carmen's quiet competence into something approaching insubordination. She acted like she owned the place, Brad was saying, his voice carrying to anyone within earshot. No respect for corporate hierarchy whatsoever. Jake Sullivan had joined the audience, adding his own commentary to support Brad's narrative. That's the problem with these cleaning companies. They hire people off the street without proper background checks. From a nearby table, Amanda Chen, Marcus's younger sister and a recent hire in Sterling's Human Resources Department, listened with growing interest. At 26, Amanda had inherited her family's analytical mind, but applied it to personnel management rather than financial markets. Did anyone actually verify her credentials? Amanda asked, her question cutting through the speculation. Brad paused, realizing that no one had thought to check Carmen's employment authorization beyond her apparent affiliation with Pinnacle Cleaning Services. Jennifer handled all that stuff. But if Pinnacle has no record of her being assigned here, Amanda continued, then what credentials did she present? The question hung in the air, exposing a gap in everyone's assumptions. They'd all seen Carmen working with apparent authority, but no one had actually verified that she was supposed to be there. Amanda pulled out her phone and called Pinnacle Cleaning Services directly. After navigating through automated menus and being transferred twice, she reached a supervisor who could access current employee assignments. I'm calling about Carmen Santos, Amanda said, using her most professional tone. She was cleaning our executive floors this morning, and we need to verify her employment status. The response was immediate and concerning. Ma'am, we don't have any employee named Carmen Santos. Could you spell the last name for me? Amanda repeated the name, then described Carmen's appearance and the work she'd been performing. The supervisor checked multiple databases before delivering a response that made Amanda's blood run cold. Ma'am, we have no record of anyone matching that description. Moreover, our executive floor contracts specify that all work must be completed before 8 a.m. None of our personnel would be authorized for daytime cleaning. Amanda ended the call and looked around the break room, where speculation had given way to an uncomfortable silence. Carmen Santos doesn't work for Pinnacle Cleaning Services. They have no record of her at all. The revelation transformed the morning's events from minor operational disruption to potential security breach. Brad's swagger evaporated as he realized that his jokes about corporate infiltration might have been accidentally accurate. Then who was she? Jake asked, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Before anyone could answer, Marcus Chun burst into the break room with the excited energy of someone who'd just solved a significant puzzle. I figured it out, he announced triumphantly. I know what she was really doing here. Everyone turned to listen, grateful for any explanation that might make sense of the morning's increasingly mysterious events. Industrial espionage, Marcus declared with the certainty of someone who'd been watching too many corporate thriller movies. She was here to steal trade secrets. The accusation was dramatic enough to be compelling, and the break room audience began considering the possibility. Sterling Financial handled sensitive information that could be valuable to competitors, and corporate espionage was a legitimate concern in the financial services industry. Think about it, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. She had access to the conference room where we keep our most sensitive client documents. She was here during the Wellington Capital meeting. She could have photographed proprietary information or planted listening devices. Amanda felt compelled to introduce some analytical rigor to Marcus's speculation, but she was cleaning the room in front of multiple witnesses. When would she have had an opportunity for espionage? Maybe that's exactly what she wanted us to think, Brad suggested, his imagination now running in thriller movie directions. Perfect cover story. Everyone ignores the cleaning lady. Jake nodded enthusiastically. And she knew about military stuff, remember? That's classic spy training. The conversation was becoming increasingly paranoid, but Amanda noticed that no one was considering alternative explanations. Their assumptions about Carmen's motives were all negative, despite her having caused no actual harm and having performed exceptionally high-quality work. Has anyone considered that she might just be overqualified for cleaning work? Amanda asked. Maybe she has a military background and needed employment. Marcus dismissed the suggestion with a wave of his hand. Overqualified people don't sneak into buildings using fake credentials. They apply for appropriate positions through normal channels. Down in the security office, Helen Rodriguez was conducting her own investigation. She'd pulled Carmen's image from the surveillance footage and was running it through facial recognition databases, hoping to establish her true identity. The initial results were frustrating. Carmen Santos appeared in no criminal databases, no known terrorist watch lists, and no civilian employment records that matched her age and appearance. For someone who demonstrated such familiarity with building systems and security protocols, she had remarkably little digital footprint. It's like she doesn't exist, Helen said to Jennifer and David, who were still reviewing the morning's footage. No social media presence, no credit history, no previous addresses, nothing. David's risk assessment training was now operating at full capacity. People don't just appear from nowhere. Everyone leaves digital traces in modern society. Unless they're specifically trained to avoid leaving traces, Helen replied grimly. Jennifer felt increasingly uncomfortable as the implications became clear. Are you suggesting she's some kind of professional operative? I'm suggesting that Carmen Santos, whoever she really is, has skills and knowledge that are inconsistent with civilian employment, Helen said carefully. Whether that makes her dangerous depends on what she was actually doing here. Back in the break room, Marcus's espionage theory was gaining momentum among the afternoon crowd. Word had spread throughout the building that an unidentified woman had spent hours on the executive floor under mysterious circumstances, and each retelling added new layers of suspicion and speculation. I heard she had electronic equipment, someone whispered, transforming Carmen's cleaning supplies into high-tech surveillance gear. My cousin works in corporate security, another person added. He says industrial espionage is happening constantly. Companies hire professionals to steal competitor information. The rumors were taking on a life of their own, growing more elaborate and sinister with each repetition. Carmen's quiet competence was being reinterpreted as suspicious infiltration. Her technical knowledge was evidence of specialized training rather than diverse work experience. Amanda watched the speculation spiral with growing concern. As an HR professional, she'd seen how workplace rumors could destroy reputations and create toxic environments based on incomplete information and prejudicial assumptions. We should wait for security's investigation, she suggested, trying to inject some rationality into the increasingly heated discussion. Security already confirmed she's not who she claimed to be, Brad replied, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd found a genuine conspiracy. What more evidence do we need? The question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental flaw in everyone's reasoning. They were assuming malicious intent based on irregularities in Carmen's credentials, without considering benign explanations for her presence or acknowledging the quality of work she'd performed. By closing time, Carmen Santos had been transformed. From anonymous cleaning contractor to mysterious infiltrator in the collective imagination of Sterling Financial's employees. The truth of her identity remained unknown, but the building's rumor mill had already decided she represented some kind of threat. Helen Rodriguez locked the security footage in encrypted storage and began preparing a formal incident report for Robert Sterling's review. Whatever Carmen's true story was, it would require investigation beyond Sterling Financial's internal capabilities. The executive floor remained immaculate, clean to a standard that exceeded anything the building had previously experienced. But the questions surrounding the woman who'd achieved that perfection were multiplying faster than anyone could answer them. Sterling Financial had experienced its most successful client meeting in years, but the cost of that success might include a security breach that no one fully understood. The morning's assumptions about service workers and corporate hierarchies had been shattered, replaced by suspicions that might prove equally unfounded. Carmen Santos had vanished as mysteriously as she'd appeared, leaving behind a building full of people who were no longer certain about anything they'd witnessed. And the mystery of her true identity was just beginning to unfold. The call came at 6:47 a.m. the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Carmen Santos had vanished from Sterling Financial's executive floor. Helen Rodriguez was reviewing overnight security reports when her phone rang with a distinctive tone, reserved for emergency communications from the building's central monitoring station. "Rodriguez here," she answered, automatically checking her watch and noting the unusually early hour for operational calls. "Helen, this is Tom Valdez at Central Security. We've got a situation developing at your location that requires immediate attention." Tom's voice carried the controlled urgency of someone who'd spent 20 years managing crisis situations for Seattle's largest commercial buildings. When he used that tone, Helen knew she was about to deal with something beyond routine. Security concerns. "What kind of situation?" Helen asked, already reaching for her emergency response protocols. "Suspicious activity detected on the Sterling Financial property. Someone's been conducting surveillance of your building from multiple locations over the past 5 days. Professional-grade equipment, rotating observation points, pattern analysis that suggests advanced training." Helen felt her stomach drop. Corporate surveillance operations were rare but not unheard of in Seattle's competitive financial district. They usually preceded major security breaches, industrial espionage attempts, or worse, any identification. "On the surveillance team?" "That's where it gets interesting," Tom replied. "Single operator. Female, approximately 5'6", athletic build, moves like military or law enforcement. Professional enough to avoid direct identification, but our perimeter cameras caught enough to establish a pattern of behavior." The description sent alarm bells through Helen's mind. "Tom, I need you to send me everything you have on this surveillance operation. Priority 1. Already encrypted and uploading to your secure server." "Helen, there's something else. This operator isn't just watching your building, she's analyzing it. Traffic patterns, security rotations, employee access schedules. This is reconnaissance, not casual observation." Helen ended the call and immediately began reviewing the surveillance files that were populating her secure inbox. The images were grainy but clear enough to confirm her worst fears. The woman conducting surveillance bore unmistakable resemblance to Carmen Santos. She picked up her secure phone and dialed Robert Sterling's private number. As building owner and Sterling Financial's senior partner, he needed to know about potential threats to corporate security immediately. "Robert Sterling, Mr. Sterling, this is Helen Rodriguez. We have a developing security situation that requires your immediate attention. The woman who was in your building last Tuesday has been conducting surveillance operations all week." The silence that followed lasted long enough for Helen to wonder if the connection had been lost. When Robert finally spoke, his voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd learned to process bad news without showing panic. How certain are you of the identification? Facial recognition gives us an 87% probability match. Movement patterns and physical characteristics are consistent. Sir, this suggests coordinated intelligence gathering with specific objectives. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Robert said. Contact Patricia Hawthorne and request her presence. Also, reach out to Detective Captain Morrison at Seattle PD. We may need law enforcement consultation. Helen spent the next 15 minutes compiling evidence files and preparing briefing materials that would bring senior management up to speed on the developing crisis. The surveillance images told a disturbing story of professional reconnaissance that had been ongoing for days without detection. Carmen Santos, or whoever she really was, had been systematically studying Sterling Financial's operations. She'd photographed employee arrival and departure patterns, documented security rotations, and identified vulnerable access points that could be exploited for unauthorized entry. Robert Sterling arrived accompanied by Patricia Hawthorne, whose legal expertise would be essential if the situation escalated to criminal prosecution. Both executives looked grim as they reviewed the evidence Helen had assembled. This level of surveillance suggests significant resources and professional training, Patricia observed, studying photographs that showed Carmen using telescopic equipment from concealed positions. Individual operators don't typically have access to this kind of technology, Robert nodded gravely. Which means she's either working for a well-funded organization or has access to government-grade equipment through previous employment. Detective Captain Lisa Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, bringing with her the authority of Seattle Police Department's Corporate Crimes Unit. At 44, Captain Morrison had spent 15 years investigating white-collar criminal activity, developing expertise in corporate espionage, financial fraud, and industrial sabotage. Her gray suit was professional but practical, designed for someone who spent equal time in boardrooms and crime scenes. She carried herself with the alert confidence of someone who'd learned to read criminal intent before it manifested in overt action. What exactly are we dealing with? Captain Morrison asked, settling into Helen's conference chair and accepting the evidence files that had been prepared for her review. Systematic surveillance of our facility by an individual who previously gained unauthorized access to our executive floors, Robert explained. She represented herself as a clean contractor, but demonstrated knowledge and capabilities that are inconsistent with civilian employment. Captain Morrison reviewed the surveillance photographs with professional attention, noting details that civilian observers might miss. This equipment costs $50,000 minimum. The positioning shows understanding of electronic countermeasures and optimal observation angles. Whoever this is, she's had extensive training. Patricia leaned forward, her legal instincts engaging. What are our options for response? This clearly constitutes criminal trespass and possibly conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. First, we need to establish her true identity, Captain Morrison replied. I'll run these images through federal databases, including military personnel records and law enforcement systems. If she's had professional training, there should be documentation. Helen had been monitoring her computer terminal during the discussion, and now she looked up with an expression that made everyone in the room suddenly attentive. We may have an immediate problem. Motion sensors just detected unauthorized access to the building's service levels. The timing was too coincidental to be accidental. Carmen Santos had been conducting surveillance for days, analyzing Sterling Financial security protocols and operational patterns. Now, while senior management was meeting to discuss her activities, she'd chosen to make another appearance. She's here, Helen said quietly, pulling up real-time security feeds on her main monitor. The service elevator just stopped at the 15th floor. On screen, Carmen emerged from the elevator with the same economical movements she displayed the previous week. But this time, her presence wasn't disguised as routine maintenance. She moved with purpose towards Sterling Financial's executive offices, carrying equipment that clearly wasn't cleaning supplies. What's she carrying? Robert asked, studying the monitor with intense concentration. Helen zoomed in on Carmen's equipment, revealing technical devices that made Captain Morrison sit up straight in her chair. Electronic countermeasures equipment. Signal detection. Devices. This isn't surveillance anymore. This is active penetration. Captain Morrison was already on her radio, calling for backup units to respond to Sterling Financial Tower. All units, we have a break-in and entering in progress at 1247 Fifth Avenue. Suspect is a professional operator with possible electronic equipment. Approach with caution. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Marcus Chun was arriving early for what he hoped would be a productive day of trading European markets. His routine included checking overnight market movements, reviewing client portfolios, and preparing for the morning's volatility when American exchanges opened. He stepped off the main elevator onto Sterling Financial's executive floor and immediately noticed something wrong. The ambient lighting was different, somehow more focused and directional than normal. The air circulation seemed more pronounced, as if building systems were operating at higher capacity than standard settings. Most concerning, the soft electronic hum that provided background noise in modern office buildings had shifted to a different frequency. Someone had been adjusting building systems again, just as Carmen had done the previous week. Marcus pulled out his phone to call security, but the device showed no signal strength despite being on a floor that typically had excellent cellular coverage. Electronic interference was blocking communications, suggesting the presence of sophisticated jamming equipment. His trading instincts, honed by years of recognizing market manipulation before it became obvious, told him that someone was creating conditions for an operation that required communication isolation and environmental control. This wasn't random vandalism or casual trespass. This was a planned infiltration. Carmen appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving towards Sterling Financial's main server room with equipment that Marcus didn't recognize but instinctively knew was dangerous. She wasn't hiding her presence anymore, suggesting that she'd moved from reconnaissance to active operation. "Hey," Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the marble corridor. "You're not supposed to be here." Carmen paused but didn't turn around. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "Stay where you are. Don't move. Don't use your phone." The commands were delivered with military precision, leaving no doubt that compliance wasn't optional. Marcus found himself obeying without conscious decision, his body responding to vocal authority that bypassed rational thought. Carmen continued toward the server room, but now Marcus could see her equipment more clearly. Electronic devices that looked like they belonged in a spy movie, technical gear that suggested capabilities far beyond anything a cleaning contractor would possess. His phone buzzed with an incoming text message, somehow penetrating the electronic interference that had been blocking cellular signals. The message was from an unknown number, but the content made his blood run cold. "Building evacuation in progress. Exit immediately. Do not use elevators." In the security office, Helen watched her monitors go dark one by one as Carmen's electronic countermeasures systematically disabled Sterling Financial surveillance network. "She's taking down our entire security system." Captain Morrison was coordinating with her backup units, but the response was complicated by Carmen's electronic jamming, which was interfering with police communications. "How many people are in the building?" "Skeleton crew," Robert replied. "Maybe 15 employees total. Most people don't arrive until 8. "We need to evacuate everyone immediately," Captain Morrison said. "If she's using electronic warfare equipment, we're dealing with someone who has access to military-grade technology." Patricia's legal mind was processing implications that went far beyond simple corporate espionage. If she's using government equipment without authorization, this could be a federal matter. We need to contact the FBI immediately. Helen's remaining security monitors showed Carmen entering Sterling Financial's server room, where the company's most sensitive data was stored. Client records, trade secrets, financial algorithms that represented decades of competitive advantage. If she was there to steal information, she'd chosen the perfect target. But something about her movements suggested a different objective. Instead of connecting external storage devices or photographing sensitive documents, Carmen was making adjustments to the servers themselves. She was modifying systems rather than copying them. She's not stealing data, Helen observed, watching Carmen work with technical precision that suggested intimate familiarity with Sterling Financial's network architecture. She's installing something. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. Carmen Santos wasn't conducting corporate espionage. She was implementing some kind of upgrade or modification to Sterling Financial's computer systems. The week of surveillance hadn't been reconnaissance for theft. It had been preparation for installation. Captain Morrison's radio crackled with reports from her backup units. "Captain, we've got a complication. The building's emergency systems just activated automated lockdown protocols. All elevators are offline and stairwell access doors are sealed. Can your people override the lockdown?" Robert asked, understanding that Sterling Financial's employees were now trapped on their respective floors. "Negative. These are federal-grade security protocols. We'd need specialized equipment to break through." Helen stared at her remaining monitors in growing amazement. Carmen had just demonstrated the ability to take control of Sterling Financial's entire building management system, activating security protocols that Helen hadn't even known existed. "How does she know our emergency systems better than we do?" Helen asked the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to answer. On the 10th floor, Marcus watched through the server room's glass walls as Carmen completed whatever installation she'd been performing. Her equipment was being packed away with the same methodical precision she'd brought to cleaning supplies the previous week. When she emerged from the server room, she looked directly at Marcus with an expression that was neither hostile nor apologetic. Just professional acknowledgement of someone who'd witnessed an operation that he couldn't possibly understand. "Mr. Shun," she said, using his name despite never having been introduced. "Your building's security has been significantly upgraded. You're safer now than you were an hour ago." Before Marcus could respond, Carmen walked past him toward the service elevator, leaving behind a floor full of questions and a building full of people who were about to discover that everything they thought they knew about security had just been redefined. The federal response team arrived at Sterling Financial Tower with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke to extensive training and unlimited resources. 3 black SUVs pulled up simultaneously at the building's main entrance, disgorging agents whose tactical gear and professional bearing immediately transformed the situation from local police matter to national security incident. Agent Sarah Whitman stepped out of the lead vehicle, her FBI credentials clearly visible on the tactical vest that marked her as the operations commanding officer. At 38, she'd spent 12 years investigating domestic terrorism, corporate espionage, and national security threats that required the kind of surgical response that regular law enforcement couldn't provide. Behind her, 2 specialists in electronic countermeasures carried equipment designed to penetrate the sophisticated jamming that had disabled Sterling Financial's communications. Their gear represented millions of dollars in research and development, technology that existed specifically to counter the kind of professional-grade interference that Carmen Santos had deployed. Captain Morrison met Agent Whitman at the building's entrance, briefing her on the developing situation, while federal technicians began setting up their mobile command center. "Subject has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything in our databases. Electronic warfare, building system control, and technical knowledge that suggests military or intelligence background. Do we have visual confirmation of the subject's current location? Agent Whitman asked, studying the architectural plans that her team had acquired during their rapid response deployment. She was last seen on the 15th floor, accessing the primary server room. All internal surveillance has been disabled, but thermal imaging shows a single heat signature moving through the executive offices. Agent Whitman's expression suggested that she was processing information beyond what Captain Morrison could provide. "Agent Murphy," she called to one of her specialists, "I need you to run facial recognition on the surveillance images through federal databases. Priority Alpha clearance." Agent Murphy, a computer forensics expert whose security clearance allowed him access to classified personnel files, began uploading Carmen's image to systems that existed outside normal law enforcement channels. The databases he accessed contained records that officially didn't exist, maintained by agencies that rarely acknowledge their operations publicly. The results appeared on his screen within minutes, and his expression shifted from professional concentration to something approaching disbelief. "Agent Whitman, you need to see this immediately." The federal team gathered around Murphy's mobile workstation, studying information that made everyone suddenly aware they were dealing with something far beyond their initial assumptions. Carmen Santos's true identity was buried in files that carried classification levels requiring presidential authorization to access. Subject's real name is Major Carmen Elena Santos, United States Army Special Operations Command. Military occupational specialty, counterintelligence operations. Service record spans 15 years, including deployments to classified locations, conducting operations that are redacted at the highest levels. Agent Whitman felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. Current status? "That's where it gets complicated," Murphy replied, scrolling through service records that told a story of extraordinary military achievement, followed by mysterious circumstances. Major Santos was reported killed in action 18 months ago during a classified operation in Eastern Europe. Official cause of death: improvised explosive device. Body never recovered. The revelation hit the federal team like a physical blow. They weren't dealing with a corporate spy or domestic terrorist. They were confronting a decorated military officer who was officially dead, but apparently very much alive and operating within United States territory without authorization. "If she's alive, why hasn't she reported for duty?" Agent Whitman asked, studying photographs that showed Carmen receiving commendations from generals whose names were classified above her clearance level. Murphy continued reading through files that painted a picture of military service that went far beyond conventional operations. Major Santos was part of a joint task force that conducted deep cover counterintelligence operations. Her specialization was long-term infiltration of hostile organizations, gathering intelligence while maintaining cover identities for months or years at a time. And she was working alone? Captain Morrison asked, trying to understand how a single operator could demonstrate the kind of capabilities they'd witnessed. According to her service record, Major Santos operated without support structure, backup communications, or extraction protocols. She was trained to complete missions using whatever resources were available locally, then disappear back into civilian cover until the next assignment. Agent Whitman was reviewing tactical assessments that described Carmen's capabilities in terms that made her current actions seem almost routine. Electronic warfare, building infiltration, systems analysis, surveillance countermeasures. She's not improvising. She's using skills that the military spent millions of dollars developing. Meanwhile, on the 15th floor, Carmen was completing the final phase of whatever operation had brought her back to Sterling Financial. But instead of stealing information or planting surveillance equipment, she was installing something that would fundamentally change the building's security capabilities. Marcus Chun watched through the server room's glass walls as Carmen connected devices to Sterling Financial's main computer network. Her movements were precise and economical, suggesting familiarity with similar installations performed under similar circumstances. When she finished, Carmen emerged from the server room and looked directly at Marcus with an expression that was neither threatening nor apologetic. Just professional acknowledgement of someone who'd witnessed an operation that he couldn't possibly comprehend. "Mr. Chun," she said, using his name despite their limited previous interaction. "Your building's security has been upgraded significantly. Everyone here is safer now than they were this morning." Marcus found his voice despite the surreal circumstances. "Upgraded how? Who are you working for?" Carmen paused, considering how much information she could safely provide without compromising operational security. "There are threats to this building that go beyond corporate espionage. My job is to make sure those threats can't succeed." "What kind of threats?" Marcus pressed, his financial training compelling him to seek specific information rather than accepting vague assurances. "The kind that kill people," Carmen replied simply. "The kind that your normal security systems wouldn't detect until it was too late." Down in the Federal Command Center, Agent Whitman was coordinating with agencies whose existence wasn't publicly acknowledged. The discovery that Carmen Santos was alive had triggered protocols that existed specifically for handling military personnel who'd gone off-grid during classified operations. The Pentagon confirms that Major Santos was assigned to a joint task force investigating terrorist financing networks, Agent Whitman reported to her team. Her last known mission involved infiltrating an organization that was planning attacks on financial institutions. Agent Murphy looked up from his computer analysis with an expression that suggested he'd just solved a significant puzzle. "Agent Whitman, I think I know why she's here. Sterling Financial processes transactions for 17 international banks, including 3 that were flagged by Major Santos's intelligence network." The pieces were beginning to form a picture that transformed Carmen from mysterious infiltrator to undercover protector. Her surveillance of Sterling Financial hadn't been reconnaissance for criminal activity. It had been threat assessment for defensive purposes. "She's not here to steal from Sterling Financial," Agent Whitman realized. "She's here to protect it." Captain Morrison was studying the intelligence files that painted Carmen as one of the military's most effective counterintelligence operators. But why operate without authorization? Why not coordinate with federal authorities? "Because her cover was blown 18 months ago, Agent Murphy explained, reading through classified after-action reports. The terrorist network she'd infiltrated discovered her true identity. The explosion that supposedly killed her was actually an assassination attempt that she survived by faking her own death." Agent Whitman felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. She's been operating under deep cover for 18 months, continuing her mission without official support, because going through normal channels would expose her to the same people who tried to kill her. The federal team was processing implications that went far beyond local law enforcement capabilities. They were dealing with a decorated military officer who'd been forced to operate outside official channels to complete a mission that could prevent terrorist attacks on American financial institutions. On the 10th floor, Carmen was preparing to leave Sterling Financial for what would likely be the final time. Her installation was complete. The building's security had been upgraded beyond anything that civilian contractors could provide, and her presence was no longer necessary. But as she approached the service elevator, building-wide speakers activated, with an announcement that made her freeze in recognition of a voice she hadn't heard in 18 months. "Major Santos," the voice said, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding military operations. "This is Colonel James Harrison, Army Intelligence. You are ordered to stand down and report for debriefing immediately." Carmen's hand moved instinctively toward her radio before she remembered that she wasn't carrying military communications equipment. Her cover identity as a civilian cleaning contractor required maintaining the illusion that she had no military training or background, but the announcement had just blown that cover in front of witnesses, who would now understand that everything they'd assumed about her identity had been completely wrong. Marcus. Chun stared at Carmen with growing comprehension. You're military. You're not a cleaning lady at all. Carmen met his gaze with the direct honesty that military training had ingrained in her character. Master Sergeant Carmen Santos, United States Army, Counterintelligence Operations. The rank. Correction was automatic, reflecting 15 years of military discipline that couldn't be suppressed even under the most stressful circumstances. But Marcus noticed that she'd been given a different rank than the one Colonel Harrison had used, suggesting complexities in her service record that weren't immediately apparent. Major Santos. Colonel Harrison's voice continued over the building. Speakers, you have been classified as missing in action for 18 months. Your current operation is unauthorized and potentially compromises national security interests. Carmen's response was immediate and carried the edge of someone who'd been pushed beyond the limits of professional patience. Colonel Harrison, with respect, your intelligence is 18 months out of date. The terrorist network you think I'm investigating has evolved beyond your current threat assessments. The exchange was being broadcast throughout Sterling Financial Tower, giving everyone in the building access to information that was normally classified at the highest levels of military intelligence. Employees who'd spent the morning speculating about Carmen's identity were now listening to a conversation that revealed the existence of terrorist threats targeting their workplace. Down in the Federal Command Center, Agent Whitman was coordinating with Pentagon officials who were equally surprised to discover that Major Santos was alive and continuing her mission without authorization. The situation required delicate handling that balanced national security concerns with the operational reality that Carmen had apparently been successful in preventing terrorist attacks through her unauthorized activities. Colonel Harrison. Agent Whitman said into her secure communications device, "This is FBI Agent Whitman. We need immediate clarification on Major Santos's operational status and mission parameters." The response came not from Colonel Harrison, but from a voice that carried the authority of much higher military command. Agent Whitman, this is General Patricia Crawford, Army Intelligence Command. Major Santos is operating under classified protocols that require her to maintain cover, even from federal law enforcement. The revelation that Carmen's operation had high-level military authorization changed everything. She wasn't a rogue operative working outside official channels. She was a deep cover agent whose mission was so sensitive that even the FBI hadn't been briefed on her activities. General Crawford, Agent Whitman replied, Major Santos has just demonstrated capabilities that suggest she's been operating with significant resources and technical support. How long has this mission been active? 2 years, General Crawford answered. Major Santos has been tracking the terrorist financing network that uses American financial institutions to fund attacks worldwide. Her infiltration of that network has prevented 6 planned attacks and identified funding sources that we're still investigating. On the 10th floor, Carmen was listening to her operational details being discussed over building speakers with the kind of professional detachment that came from years of operating in situations where mission security trumped personal privacy. Marcus Chun found himself in the surreal position of standing next to a decorated military intelligence officer while listening to Pentagon officials discuss classified operations. The terrorist network that was planning to attack this building, he said quietly. Are they real? Carmen nodded, her expression carrying the weight of someone who'd spent 18 months gathering intelligence on threats that most people couldn't imagine. Real, well-funded, and sophisticated enough to infiltrate financial institutions without triggering normal security protocols. And you've been protecting us this whole time? Protecting you, Carmen confirmed. and approximately 40,000 other people who work in buildings that have been targeted by this network. The scope of Carmen's mission was beginning to become clear. She hadn't been operating as a lone wolf pursuing personal vendetta. She'd been conducting a systematic counterintelligence operation designed to prevent mass casualties from terrorist attacks that would have devastated America's financial infrastructure. Marcus looked at Carmen with a new understanding of what he'd witnessed over the past week. When you were cleaning our conference room, you were really conducting a security assessment. I was identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited for hostile infiltration, Carmen confirmed. Your building's security was adequate for preventing ordinary criminal activity, but completely inadequate for stopping professionally trained terrorists. The revelation transformed every interaction Marcus had witnessed between Carmen and Sterling Financial's employees. Her quiet competence hadn't been the overqualification of someone working beneath her abilities. It had been the professional expertise of someone conducting life-or-death security operations while maintaining civilian cover. Down in the Federal Command Center, General Crawford was providing Agent Whitman with classified briefings that painted Carmen's mission as one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in recent military history. Major Santos has provided intelligence that led to the arrest of 37 terrorist operatives across 6 countries, General Crawford explained. Her work has disrupted financing networks worth over $200 million and prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of people. Agent Whitman was reviewing operational summaries that described Carmen's activities over the past 18 months. Instead of being a rogue operative, she'd been one of the military's most effective assets, working under cover so deep that even federal agencies hadn't been briefed on her activities. Why wasn't the FBI informed about her operation? Agent Whitman asked, struggling to understand how such a significant mission could have been conducted without interagency coordination. Because the terrorist network had infiltrated federal law enforcement, General Crawford replied grimly. Major Santos was operating under protocols designed specifically to prevent information leaks that could compromise her safety. The revelation hit Agent Whitman like a physical blow. Carmen Santos hadn't been operating outside official channels because she was rogue. She'd been operating alone because federal agencies couldn't be trusted with information about her mission. On the 10th floor, Carmen was preparing to extract from Sterling Financial now that her cover had been blown and her mission was complete. But Marcus Chun was struggling to process the magnitude of what he'd learned about the woman he'd dismissed as an incompetent cleaning contractor. Major Santos, he said, using her correct rank for the first time, I owe you an apology. We all do. Carmen's response carried the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured far worse treatment while maintaining operational security. Mr. Chun, you reacted to the information you had available. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. But we were wrong about everything, Marcus insisted. We treated you like you didn't belong here when you were actually saving our lives. Carmen shouldered her equipment bag with the same methodical precision she'd brought to her cleaning cart, preparing to disappear back into whatever deep cover operation would come next. Sometimes the best protection is invisible, Mr. Chun. Sometimes the people who keep you safest are the ones you never notice. The building's lockdown protocols were being lifted by federal technicians, but Carmen Santos had already completed her transformation from mysterious cleaning contractor to revealed military hero. Sterling Financial's employees would never again make assumptions about the service workers who moved quietly through their professional lives. The woman they'd mocked for being out of place had actually been the most qualified person in the building. And her quiet competence had been the only thing standing between them and terrorist attacks that would have destroyed everything they'd worked to build. The Pentagon's live transmission to Sterling Financial Tower continued as General Crawford provided Agent Whitman with operational details that painted Carmen's mission as a masterpiece of long-term strategic intelligence gathering. But the most startling revelation was yet to come. Agent Whitman, General Crawford said over the secure channel, Major Santos has requested permission to demonstrate the security upgrades she's installed at Sterling Financial. Given that her cover is now compromised, this may be our only opportunity to document the effectiveness of her counterterrorism protocols. Agent Whitman looked up at the building's upper floors, where Carmen remained on the executive level with Marcus Chun as her unwitting witness. What kind of demonstration are we talking about, General? Real-time threat simulation, came the reply. Major Santos has installed defensive systems that can detect and neutralize terrorist infiltration attempts. With your permission, she ran a live test using actual threat scenarios. The request was unprecedented in Whitman's experience. Military personnel didn't typically demonstrate classified capabilities for civilian audiences, even under controlled circumstances. But Carmen Santos had been operating outside normal protocols for 18 months, and her methods had produced results that conventional approaches couldn't match. Permission granted, Agent Whitman said, understanding that she was about to witness something that would redefine her understanding of counterterrorism operations. On the 10th floor, Carmen received the authorization through her concealed military communications device. She turned to Marcus with an expression that carried both professional courtesy and quiet warning. Mr. Chun, you're about to see security capabilities that most people never witness. What I'm going to show you is classified, but given the circumstances, you have clearance as a material witness. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to witness. Carmen moved to Sterling Financial's main computer terminal and began entering commands that activated systems he didn't know existed within the building. The conference room's presentation. Screens flickered to life, displaying real-time building schematics that showed Sterling Financial's layout in three-dimensional detail. But these weren't architectural drawings. They were tactical maps that highlighted potential infiltration routes, defensive positions, and structural vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile forces. Your building has been under observation by terrorist operatives for 6 months. Carmen explained, her fingers moving across the keyboard with surgical precision. They've identified 17 different attack vectors, including approaches to the parking garage, service elevators, and ventilation systems. The displays updated to show recorded surveillance footage of individuals who'd been conducting reconnaissance around Sterling Financial Tower. Marcus recognized some of the faces as people he'd seen in the building's lobby, vendors who delivered packages, maintenance workers who'd performed routine services. These people aren't random civilians, Carmen continued. They're trained operatives who've been mapping your building's security systems, employee schedules, and operational vulnerabilities. Without intervention, they would have struck within the next 2 weeks. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized how close Sterling Financial had come to experiencing a terrorist attack without anyone in the building having the slightest awareness of the threat. Carmen's demonstration continued as she activated defensive protocols that transformed Sterling Financial from vulnerable target to hardened facility. Motion sensors that had been disguised as routine building equipment revealed themselves as sophisticated early warning systems. Fire safety devices transformed into chemical detection units. Even the elevator systems had been modified to serve as containment mechanisms that could isolate hostile forces. The cleaning work I performed wasn't just maintaining appearances, Carmen explained as the building's hidden capabilities became visible on the tactical displays. Every surface I touched, every system I adjusted, was being modified to serve dual purposes. Functional building operations that could instantly convert to defensive measures. Down in the Federal Command Center, Agent Whitman watched the demonstration through feeds that Carmen was transmitting directly to FBI monitoring equipment. The sophistication of the security upgrades was beyond anything she'd seen in civilian facilities, representing technology that existed primarily in military installations and government buildings. General Crawford, Agent Whitman said into her secure communications device. Major Santos has transformed this building into something approaching a fortress. How did she accomplish this level of modification without building management knowledge? Major Santos specializes in adaptive engineering. General Crawford replied, she can modify existing systems to serve defensive purposes using only materials and equipment available through normal commercial channels. It's a skill set that took 5 years to develop and requires extensive training in multiple engineering disciplines. Meanwhile, Sterling Financial's employees were being evacuated to a safe distance as Carmen's demonstration entered its most dramatic phase. She activated a simulated terrorist infiltration scenario that would test every defensive system she'd installed over the past week. The building's exterior lights shifted to tactical configuration, providing optimal visibility for defensive observation while eliminating concealment opportunities for hostile forces. Windows that appeared normal revealed themselves as reinforced barriers that could withstand small arms fire. Even the landscaping around the building's entrance had been modified to channel potential attackers into predetermined kill zones where defensive measures would be most effective. This is incredible, Agent Whitman murmured, watching Sterling Financial Tower transform from ordinary commercial building to military-grade defensive installation. She's created capabilities that would take conventional security contractors months to install, and she did it while maintaining the appearance of routine cleaning work. But Carmen's demonstration wasn't complete. The most impressive aspect of her security upgrades was their integration with Seattle's broader emergency response network. The system she'd installed could automatically coordinate with police, fire, and federal agencies to provide real-time intelligence about threats before they materialized into actual attacks. Mr. Chun, Carmen said, her attention focused on monitoring displays that showed the building's defensive status. The terrorist network that was targeting your building has been disrupted, but threats to financial institutions remain active. The systems I've installed will continue protecting Sterling Financial even after I'm no longer here to monitor them. Marcus was studying tactical displays that showed Sterling Financial's new security capabilities with a mixture of amazement and growing respect for Carmen's professional expertise. How long will these systems remain active? Indefinitely, Carmen replied. They're designed to adapt and upgrade automatically as new threats are identified. Your building is now part of a network that shares intelligence about terrorist activities across 17 major financial centers. The scope of Carmen's operation was becoming clear. She hadn't just protected Sterling Financial as an isolated facility. She'd integrated it into a national security network that provided ongoing protection against evolving terrorist threats. 3 hours later, Sterling Financial Tower had returned to normal operational status, but nothing about the building would ever be quite the same. Carmen's demonstration had concluded successfully, proving that her security upgrades could detect and neutralize terrorist threats that conventional systems would miss entirely. Robert Sterling stood in his executive office, reviewing after-action reports that documented the morning's extraordinary events. As building owner and senior partner, he was responsible for understanding how a decorated military officer had spent a week operating within his facility without anyone recognizing her true identity or mission. The financial implications alone are staggering, Patricia Hawthorne observed, studying legal documents that outline Sterling Financial's new status as a federally protected facility. Insurance premiums, security costs, regulatory compliance. Major Santos has saved us millions of dollars in potential losses. Robert nodded, but his attention was focused on broader implications that went beyond immediate financial considerations. She operated for a week under our noses, demonstrating capabilities that we couldn't recognize or appreciate. What does that say about our ability to assess the people around us? The question hung in the air, challenging assumptions that had guided Sterling Financial's corporate culture for decades. Carmen Santos had been dismissed and mocked by employees who judged her based on her apparent position rather than her actual qualifications. Jennifer Walsh knocked on the conference room door, carrying personnel files that she'd spent the afternoon compiling. "Mr. Sterling, I've reviewed our security protocols and staffing procedures. We need to make significant changes to prevent similar oversights in the future." She spread documents across the mahogany table that had been cleaned to perfection by Carmen's expert attention. "Our background check procedures focus on criminal history and employment verification, but they don't identify overqualified applicants who might be working beneath their capabilities for legitimate reasons." Patricia studied the files with her lawyer's eye for detail. "You're suggesting that we missed Carmen's qualifications because we weren't looking for them?" "I'm suggesting that we made assumptions about service workers that prevented us from recognizing exceptional capability when it was right in front of us," Jennifer replied. Carmen Santos demonstrated knowledge and skills that should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. Robert walked to the conference room windows looking out at Seattle's financial district where other buildings might be harboring similar secrets. How many other people do we interact with daily without truly seeing who they are or what they're capable of? The question was rhetorical, but it forced everyone in the room to consider their own preconceptions about the service workers, contractors, and support staff who kept Sterling Financial operational. Down in the building's security office, Helen Rodriguez was documenting lessons learned from Carmen's operation. As security supervisor, she was responsible for ensuring that Sterling Financial's protective measures could identify future threats while also recognizing legitimate protective activities. "The most disturbing aspect," Helen wrote in her incident report, "was our complete failure to recognize that Major Santos was conducting authorized security operations. We interpreted her competence as suspicious activity rather than professional expertise." Agent Whitman stopped by Helen's office before departing for federal headquarters, carrying evidence files that would be classified at the highest levels of national security. "Helen, you couldn't have known Major Santos's true identity without access to classified military databases. Don't blame yourself for operational security that was designed to be invisible. But we should have recognized that she was more than she appeared," Helen replied. "Military bearing, technical knowledge, situational awareness. The signs were there if we'd been paying attention." Agent Whitman considered Helen's self-criticism with the perspective of someone who'd spent years investigating cases where obvious clues had been missed by trained professionals. Sometimes the most important people are the ones who don't call attention to themselves. Major Santos succeeded because she understood that effective protection often requires invisibility. Meanwhile, throughout Sterling Financial Tower, employees were grappling with the realization that they'd completely misjudged someone whose quiet competence had literally saved their lives. The woman they'd dismissed as an incompetent cleaning contractor had been a decorated military hero conducting life-or-death operations while maintaining perfect cover. Marcus Chun found himself reviewing every interaction he'd had with Carmen, recognizing signs of military training that he'd dismissed or ignored. Her precise movements, technical knowledge, and unflappable calm under pressure had all been indicators of professional capability that he'd been too prejudiced to notice. "I called her incompetent," Marcus said to Sarah Martinez, who'd stopped by his office to discuss the morning's revelations. "I complained about her disrupting my workflow while she was literally preventing terrorist attacks." Sarah had been equally guilty of making assumptions about Carmen's capabilities, but her analysis suggested broader patterns that went beyond individual prejudice. "We're trained to categorize people based on their apparent positions rather than their actual qualifications." Carmen's genius was understanding that our biases would make her invisible. Brad Morrison and Jake Sullivan had spent the afternoon in uncomfortable silence, reviewing their role in mocking someone whose service record included commendations from generals whose names were classified above their security clearance. Their jokes about Carmen's competence had been revealed as embarrassing displays of ignorance and prejudice. "She could have had us arrested," Brad said quietly, studying news reports about Major Santos's counter-terrorism achievements. "We were interfering with a federal operation, and she just ignored us and completed her mission." Jake was reading military citations that described Carmen's service in terms that made his earlier comments seem petty and cruel. "She spent 18 months risking her life to protect people like us, and we treated her like she was lucky to have a job cleaning our offices." The afternoon brought a steady stream of federal officials who needed to debrief Sterling Financial's employees about their interactions with Major Santos. Each conversation reinforced the magnitude of the operation they'd witnessed, and their failure to recognize its significance. By evening, word of Carmen's true identity had spread throughout Seattle's financial district, carried by employees who needed to process their shock at discovering they'd been working alongside a military hero without realizing it. The story took on mythic proportions in the retelling, but the core facts remained unchanged. A decorated Army officer had spent a week protecting Sterling Financial from terrorist threats while maintaining cover as a humble cleaning contractor. Amanda Chun, working late in human resources, was drafting new hiring protocols that would prevent similar oversights in the future. "We need to create systems that identify exceptional capability regardless of how it's presented," she wrote in her policy recommendations. "Service workers, contractors, and support staff should be evaluated based on their demonstrated competence, rather than their apparent position." Major Santos proved that extraordinary people often work in ordinary roles for reasons we might never understand. Robert Sterling remained in his office long after normal business hours, studying the tactical displays that Carmen had left active as part of Sterling Financial's new security infrastructure. The building was now protected by systems that could detect threats most people couldn't imagine, installed by someone whose qualifications exceeded those of everyone else in the building combined. "She made us safer," he said to Patricia, who'd stayed late to review the legal implications of housing federal security equipment. "But more than that, she made us think about who we are and how we treat the people around us." Patricia nodded, studying contracts that formalize Sterling Financial's status as a federally protected facility. "Major Santos gave us more than security upgrades. She gave us a lesson in recognizing capability wherever it might be found." As night fell over Seattle's financial district, Sterling Financial Tower stood as a monument to the power of quiet competence and the danger of superficial judgments. The building's new security systems would protect its occupants from threats they'd never see coming, just as Major Carmen Santos had protected them from dangers they'd never known existed. The employees who'd mocked the janitor would carry the memory of their mistake for the rest of their careers, a permanent reminder that extraordinary people often hide in plain sight, protecting and serving without recognition or gratitude. And somewhere in the city, Carmen Santos had already disappeared back into whatever deep cover assignment would come next, carrying with her the knowledge that she'd successfully completed another impossible mission while maintaining the invisibility that made her so effective. System had recognized what human prejudice had missed, that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to prove how dangerous they are. And sometimes the most qualified person in any room is the one everyone assumes doesn't belong there. Sterling Financial would never be the same, but that was exactly what Major Santos had intended. Her mission was complete, her cover was blown, and her legend had just begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.